All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Carly Detlefson. I am the Project 10 Regional Transition Representative for Region 2, which means that I support 21 traditional school districts and lab schools in Northeast and North Central Florida. Thank you guys for being here today. I'm not quite sure how I'm going to top the keynote. That's going to be hard to top because, compliance is not really the most riveting topic out there, but we'll do the best we can to get through our session today. So today what we're going to talk about mostly is we're not necessarily going to go step by step through compliance and talk about a lot of the different compliance components, but what we are going to talk about today is kind of understanding the resources that are out there for you that you can access to help you or your schools or your teachers, your teams write good quality compliant transition IEPs. So we're going to observe the relationship between the protocol standards for compliance and the components of the transition IEP. So we're going to look at some of those compliance pieces and kind of where we see those within the transition IEP. We're going to talk about resources that you can use to enable you to make sure that you understand the protocol so that you understand all of the compliance requirements that are required of your transition IEPs. And then again, like I said, we're going to look at resources and some of the resources that are out there for you to help you assess your transition IEPs and ensure that what you are writing is a good quality and compliant transition IEP. So the first thing I wanted to bring to your attention is, if you didn't know, Project 10 has a brand new training that is available. It started, we launched it this fall. A brand new training called Transition Individual Educational Plan Compliance Self-Assessment Training. So what this training does is it goes through the compliance components that are required for federal and state, those federal and state requirements. It goes through all of those standards and kind of walks you through each standard and making sure that you understand what the standard is asking for and to make sure that you are meeting the compliance requirements for your IEPs. So this is a brand new training, again, that Project 10 has developed. We started presenting it this fall, so a lot of districts have accessed this brand new training so far, but it's been going really well. We've gotten a lot of requests for it. People seem to really enjoy this training. It really kind of helps them understand all of those compliance pieces. So I know that if you were in the transition contacts meeting this morning, I know that Wendy spent some time kind of talking about what is required in the IEP as it pertains to requirements of IDEA. So we're just going to talk a little bit, just briefly, because again, if you were in the morning session with Wendy, I know you've already seen this, and I know many of you know this already, so we won't spend a whole lot of time going through this. But as you know, the transition IEP per IDEA must include a statement of the student's present level of academic and functional performance. So we have to look at the student's disability. We have to know how their disability is going to affect their involvement and their progress in the gen ed curriculum. From that, we develop measurable annual goals that are often academic and functional that will help that student meet their needs in order to be able to make progress in the gen ed curriculum to the maximum extent possible. Our goals have to also describe how progress is going to be measured and how often that's going to be reported. So as many of you know, you report progress on your IEP goals in the same fashion that progress is reported for all non-ESE students within your school. So anytime progress reports go out at school, we also then report progress on our IEP goals at that time as well. The IEP must also contain a statement of special ed and related services that the student might need. In order to make progress, we have to look at how those services are helping them attain their annual goals, make progress in the gen ed curriculum, and to the extent of which they are educated and participate with students with and without disabilities. So when we look at their time with non-disabled peers and looking at that least restrictive environment. The IEP also has to address how students are going to be assessed on both district and statewide assessments. And then we look at those services, not only the services, but also the accommodations that we provide to students. So our services, our accommodations, and what is the frequency, location, and duration of those services. So where are those services provided, for how often, and how much time do we report or do we provide that service on the IEP? So we're always looking at how often those services are provided, where they're going to happen, and for how long. The training that was developed, this new training that was developed, came from a need for districts to really get some assistance with looking at compliance. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the self-assessment process that happens every year for districts. So every year, every school district in the state goes through self-assessment. So what self-assessment means is that your district uploads a list of students within your district who are 16 and older, who have a transition IEP. The DOE does a random selection of a certain number of IEPs based on the size of your district. If you're a small district, you may only have to pull 5 or 6 IEPs. If you are a very large district, you could be pulling upwards of 12 to 15 IEPs. So based on the size of your district, you are requested to pull certain IEPs and then do a review of those IEPs using what we call a compliant self-assessment protocol. It's the Indicator 13 protocol. I'm going to show you what it looks like in just a minute. So you pull your IEPs, you look at the protocol, you go through your IEPs, and you look at all 19 protocol standards that are there, and you're checking your IEPs to see if you have indeed met the compliance requirement for those 19 standards. Some of the standards may have an NA as not applicable, but the majority of them you're going to be answering yes or no in terms of compliance. Once you've completed that process of your own review of your IEPs, that information is then sent up to DOE, and then DOE does another random selection of those IEPs for what we call validation. And so the DOE says, great, we're glad that you self-reported that you are 100% compliant. However, we have to validate that result. And so let's say you're a small district and you had to review 5 IEPs. The DOE will say, okay, of those 5 that you reviewed, we need you to upload the records for this particular IEP. So you will upload those records, the records for that IEP, and they will go through the protocol, and they will go through those 19 standards checking for compliance. And what you want, obviously, is for your answers to match theirs, and then you are said to be compliant. If there is a difference and DOE gets a different answer than what you had when they were reviewing, of course, they will call. You guys will have a conversation, and then a determination will be made. So that process happens for all districts every year. And we call that, again, self-assessment. So on the DOE website here, you have the link that will take you to the protocol itself. So the protocol that has all 19 of those standards, and then also the instruction sheet that goes along with that. So sometimes you'll read the standard, and you might not entirely understand everything it's asking for, or maybe you're unclear about everything it's asking for. So you can go to the instruction document, and then it will give you further explanation, and it may even give you some examples as well. So this is the website for you to get to the protocol and the instructions. But this is what the protocol looks like. This is kind of just a screenshot. So at the top, you have all this information that you fill out, and then there are 19 standards that follow on this document. So they're all labeled T16-1 and then all the way through 19. So you go through those standards, looking at your IEP and checking for compliance in those areas. Now, I mentioned that you have this document. There is also an instruction document that goes along with it, which was the link on the previous slide. But in order to also help districts kind of understand, again, what these standards are exactly asking for, Project 10 also developed, as a resource to go along with the training, developed a series of checklists. So these checklists, they're checklist A, B, and C. And what you see on the screen now is an example of checklist C. So what this does is this takes, again, each standard. So where you see number 1, that's equivalent to T16.1. Where you see 2, that's T16.2. It takes each standard, gives the standard, and then we kind of break it down into some guiding questions to make sure that you are capturing all of the important pieces for compliance within that standard. So for example, T16.1, is there evidence that the IEP invitation stated that the specified purpose of the meeting was to consider post-secondary goals and transition services, and that the student, as well as any agency representative identified to provide services, would be invited. So when you read that, it's kind of like, wow, all right, there's really 3 different pieces and 3 different components in that one standard that I have to make sure that I have in my IEP in order for it to be compliant. So then we take that standard and we kind of break it down into these guiding questions. So one piece at a time. Does my notice indicate that the purpose is to consider post-secondary goals and transition services? Check. Next part. Did the notice indicate that the student was going to be invited? Yes. Does the notice indicate whether a representative of an agency was invited with the prior consent of the parent or the adult age student? So it breaks the standard down into guiding questions just to help make sure that you're hitting all of those pieces. As I said, this is checklist C. There is a checklist A and a B. So what you'll notice on this screen and then the next slide, you will see some standards that are in blue, and you may see other standards that are in yellow. So in order to meet compliance, you have to meet all federal and state requirements. So there's federal requirements, and then the states also have the option to add additional requirements for compliance. And so sometimes you will see things that are state requirements. So you have to meet all state and federal. So the items that you see in blue on our checklist are those those standards that are federally reported. So there's a certain number of standards that get federally reported. And then any of the standards that you see in yellow are going to be state standards. So these are things that are part of our state statute that have been added to the compliance requirements. So all 19 standards must be met. Some of them are physically federally reported, and others are just shows you the differentiation between what would be a state requirement versus what's a federal requirement. So checklist, let me go back. Checklist A shows all of our federally reported standards. So on checklist A, you would only see those 8 or 9 blue standards that are federally reported. Checklist B has all of the federal requirements. So everything you see on here that's not yellow. And then checklist C is a combination of all the federal and state requirements. So we use checklist C most often when we do training because, again, we want to make sure that you are checking all of your compliance requirements, both federal and state requirements for your IEP compliance. Okay. So that's our checklist. Again, that's an additional resource that was developed. It accompanies the training that we do. And then we do activities in that training with a sample IEP. And we kind of go through this checklist and we kind of walk people through how to use it to make sure that they are understanding what all of the different compliance standards are asking for. Another resource that was developed for this training was what's called the Indicator 13 Toolkit. So this is a document. It's about 13 or so pages long, and it's again a newly developed resource that accompanies this T16 training that we developed that really kind of goes through the supports that are available through Project 10 when it comes to transition IEP compliance. It goes through what are some sample transition models. So looking at transition planning as a whole, kind of what is that sequence of events that happens when we talk about doing transition planning. And then it has some additional tip sheets in there. So actually I'm going to stop share for a minute and go to that document just so that I can show you the document itself. Give me one brief moment here. So this is the toolkit right here. Oops. So it starts off kind of, again, gives you a table of contents. It starts off with, what is a compliant IEP? We talk about some of our transition indicators and kind of how they are all interrelated. We look at the focus on transition. Again, kind of what does IDEA says has to be in our IEPs. And then I really like section 3. Section 3 goes through, again, taking each standard and kind of giving you a little bit of a narrative, like what would be considered compliant and what would be considered non-compliant. And then some of them have additional helpful tips. Not all of them, but some of them have these additional tips. So for each standard, it kind of tells you, in order to be compliant, you must have the purpose of the meeting stating post-secondary goals and services. The student must be invited by name, and if determined necessary, a transition agency was clearly identified. Being non-compliant would mean that you were missing one of these items up above, and then again, kind of gives you some helpful tips. So IEP teams should not forget to get clear consent and fully document said consent for the attendance of an agency representative. So just kind of reminding you that if there is an agency that you want to invite to the IEP meeting, you have to get consent from the parent or the adult age student prior, not only prior to the meeting, but prior to putting them on the invitation itself. So again, section 3, I think is a really helpful tool for our districts and our staff, because it kind of goes through, again, what's considered compliant, what's considered non-compliant for each of those standards, and any additional helpful tips that are there. When you get to section 4, I'm not trying to make anybody dizzy. Section 4 goes through what are the supports that are available through Project 10. So Project 10 offers support for the quality and compliance of transition IEPs, so helping you develop good quality and compliant transition IEPs. So, understanding, how do I write a good course of study statement? How do I write appropriate measurable post-secondary goals? How do I know where to find transition assessments? So section 4 kind of goes through the supports that are available through Project 10. It's going to talk about that checklist C that I showed you. It'll talk about some national resources. And then we get into, again, like I told you, some transition models. So what does transition planning really look like? And what do we where do we start when we talk about transition planning? So different models that are out there, many of them obviously coming from our National Technical Assistance Center on Transition. And then when you get to the back, again, some additional resources that are out there to help with compliance and writing good compliant IEPs. And then section 7 starts some really great tip sheets. So, I need to write a present level. How do I know if I'm writing a present level the way it's intended or supposed to be written? Our present levels have 3 sections, and then we have our annual goals. And I know that when I assist districts when it comes to present levels, sometimes we confuse what needs to go in those 3 sections. So, one of the boxes is what are the student's strengths, and then what is the student able to do, and then what are the effects of the disability. So making sure that those 3 are clearly stated, that we're covering what we need to cover in each of those 3 sections of the present level. And then making sure that our annual goal is coming from that section that talks about the students' effects of their disability and what are they struggling with. So this just kind of goes through a tip sheet on how do we write a good present level. And then let's get past this part. What is meant by testing accommodations? And we start to talk about accommodations, both on testing and classroom. Writing good measurable annual goals. So like I said, sometimes I'll see these great annual goals, but what was written above in the student's affective disability and what their priority educational need is never mentions anything about what they wrote their goal for. So making sure that if I'm writing an annual goal, it's coming directly from what is that student's affected their disability, what is their priority educational need as it was stated in the present level. So making sure that that connection is there and that alignment is there. Writing good measurable IEP goals. So it just has these tip sheets about some of our transition components in the IEP. So this document is available. You can reach out to your Project 10 regional transition representative. If you haven't had this training or you haven't had your RTR develop this training in your district yet, you may want to reach out to them. Like I said, it's new. It's different than the previous training that we had. There was a quality IEP training that we would provide to districts that really kind of went through how do I write those good quality components? Like how do I write a course of study? How do I write that section that's called additional benefits and additional outcomes and benefits. How do I write that section? What's supposed to go in there? So we have that training, and then this is a new training that really focuses on those 19 compliance standards. So this is a great toolkit that's out there for you. Again, if you haven't seen it, please reach out to your Project 10 rep. If you don't know who your Project 10 rep is, we're going to share that information here at the end. So just a great little guide. All right, now I'm going to stop that. I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint. Give me 1 second. Come on. All right. What I want to show you next is kind of how the training itself is laid out. So this new training, I've just included a couple slides to kind of show you how the training is laid out, so you kind of understand what to expect if this is a training you want to request from your Project 10 staff. So the training is laid out as there'll be a slide that has the T16 standard. So all 19 standards are included in the training. So this is just one example. So T16.5 is a standard that is a new standard. This is the one that incorporates those pre-employment transition services that you need to be documenting in the IEP. So again, it will show the slide that has the standard, and then the next slide kind of goes through the guiding questions, which really kind of is what starts the conversation within the training. So here's the standard. The next slide is our guiding questions, and we have conversation about what does this mean? What should it look like in the IEP? You know, what do I need to include? So this is just an example. 16.6 is the standard that deals with whether or not the student requires instruction in self-determination and self-advocacy. So again, this is the very wordy standard, lots of words on the screen, but then here's where we kind of break it down and we look at the guiding question. So for example, this is an area that I know we've received a lot of questions about, and sometimes we see some contradiction in the IEP. So when you're considering whether or not that student needs instruction in self-determination and self-advocacy, you know, you're answering that question, yes or no. Does the student need it? Yes or no. So there's a lot of thought process, obviously, that goes into considering whether or not that student needs instruction, self-determination, self-advocacy. Sometimes we see some contradictory statements in an IEP where somebody will mark no, the student does not require instruction in self-determination, self-advocacy, but then we get to the present level, and the present level is, you know, like all about how Johnny's a hot mess and Johnny can't do this and he can't do that and he's not turning in his work on time, he's not asking for his accommodations, you know, so it's contradictory. If you said he didn't need it, but then the present level talks all about how he really doesn't possess a lot of those skills, then that's a contradiction and a misalignment within the IEP. So this just kind of serves as reminders. If you're saying that the student requires instruction in self-determination, self-advocacy, so under special considerations, if you're a peer user, it's under special considerations, and you mark yes, the student requires instruction, then that box lights up where you have to say how they're going to get it. So are they going to get it through learning strategies? Are they going to get it infused throughout their, you know, other courses? Are they going to get it as a pullout? You know, how are they going to get it? And then if you say that they require it, there needs to be a service on the services page. There needs to be an annual goal and a notation in the present level. So all of those pieces have to be there and have to be aligned in the IEP. I need it. How am I going to get it? How is it mentioned in my present level? I have an annual goal, and if I have an annual goal, I have a service on our specially designed instruction page. If I say the student does not require instruction in self-determination, self-advocacy, then those reasons should be stated in the present level. So it's not just as simple as saying no. I say no, but in my present level, I need to address why. So, you know, Johnny is able to effectively advocate and ask for his accommodations when needed. You know, he's able to do X, Y, and Z. So if I say no in my present level, I need some solid, you know, what the student is able to do in that section of my present level, where are their strengths, that they are able to self-advocate and how they're able to do that. If I say the student needs it, then I'm explaining it. I've got an annual goal. I have a service on the services page, and I'm notating how and when they're going to get that service and how they're going to get that. So just making sure that that alignment is there. And that's something that this training also focuses on. It really focuses on the alignment of the different pieces and components of the actual transition IEP. One last example from the training looks at T1610. Is there evidence that the measurable post-secondary goals were based on age-appropriate transition assessments? This is oftentimes another area where we see some misalignment, where we'll read a transition assessment section. The school, the teacher, did this transition assessment. It's beautifully laid out, talks all about what the student's strengths are and what they want to do. And then we get to the measurable post-secondary goals, and it has nothing to do with the results from the transition assessment. So the transition assessment says, he's got an interest in, let's say becoming a police officer, but then you get to the goals, and the annual the measurable post-secondary goals are not written at all about, being a police officer. So making sure that the results of our transition assessment match our measurable post-secondary goals. So we have really robust conversation in the training about this alignment piece as well. So if I do a transition assessment, I get, XYZ result. Then my measurable post-secondary goals for education and training, employment, career, and independent living as appropriate all tie and match what that transition assessment says. Now, we all live in that reality that you might do an interview with a student and you get a lot of shoulder shrugging. I don't know what I want to do. Well, you can't write your measurable post-secondary goals that say that, Johnny will earn a 4-year degree in the field of his choice. No, then if that's the case, then you didn't do the right transition assessment to get an area of interest out of that student. So you got to find an area of interest from that student. What does that transition assessment say? And then you write your goals based on that. So just making sure that all of those pieces align. So we have really, like I said, really robust conversations in the training about alignment and how that should look within the IEP. All right, I'll get off that soapbox now. So it's all about alignment, right? Making sure that all the pieces of the IEP align with themselves, everything makes sense, because that's that plan for that student. And this is what's going to help that student be successful and have really good outcomes. We want to make sure that what we're writing makes sense. I mean, some people say, well, of course it's going to align. Well, you'd be surprised when we review and we help districts and we read them that a lot of the alignment pieces aren't there. They say one thing in one section, contradict themselves in another section. So just making sure that all those pieces are consistent throughout the IEP and that they make sense for that student. At the end of that checklist C, as one of those resources, it will kind of ask you, did your IEP meet all federal and state of Florida requirements for indicator 13? So you'll go back at your checklist and you'll look at all of your 19 standards. Did I have a yes or an NA for all of my standards? If I did, then yes, I've met all federal and state requirements for indicator 13. If I have at least one no, then no, my IEP is not compliant per federal and state requirements. And then you need to go back again and address and relook at those pieces of your IEP that may not meet that requirement component. Some resources, again, these are the links that take you to that SPP 13, that T16 transition protocol that has all 19 standards. This is the link to get to the instruction document that helps you understand those instructions. We gave you a link to IDEA so you can see kind of what the regulations are for the IEP. In our training, again, as part of our training, we go through that indicator 13 checklist C. We go through all of those standards in depth. We have great conversation about them. We kind of go through those guiding questions to make sure that we have really hit all of those pieces. And then, as I showed you just before, that indicator 13 toolkit for writing good compliant transition IEPs. So those are some resources that are out there. And again, a lot of those resources that we give you physically and we kind of go over in depth when we do the training. We have a lot of other resources we give you when we do the T16 training. Like we briefly kind of go through all of those diploma options that are out there. We talk about some resources that you can use that will help you when you're having IEP meetings. So in the IEP, you have to document that you have had that conversation with families about whether or not the student wishes to pursue scholar or merit designation. So we go through what resources are out there that can help you have those conversations with families, because we know that you're not school counselors. You don't have the requirements for scholar designation memorized in your brain, but we talk about resources that are out there, like the academic advisement flyer that's on the DOE website that goes through and explains the requirements for scholar and merit, so that you don't have to have that memorized, but you have something that you can use as talking points when you're meeting with families. So we give you all kinds of additional resources when we do this training. If you're not sure who your Project 10 regional transition representative is, here is our map. So if you are in the Panhandle going as far east as Madison and Taylor, your regional transition representative is Tracy. If you are in Northeast and North Central Florida in the gold, I am your transition representative. If you are here in East Central Florida, that's with Franklin Coker. West Central Florida is Freddie Valadez, and then our southern districts are with Lisa Friedman Chavez. With Project 10, we also have 2 additional representatives that serve statewide. So the 5 regional transition reps all have a designated region, but we have 2 representatives that are statewide that have kind of specialized areas. So if you have questions or concerns about your DJJ sites, your Department of Juvenile Justice sites that might be in your district, or just questions in general about DJJ, Carla Green is our representative that kind of handles that area of DJJ, as well as Department of Corrections. And then alternative education or alternative schools, Miss Joey Nice is a member of the Project 10 staff, and then she kind of handles that area of alt ed. So Joey and Carla both cover the whole state. They are physically located up there in Tallahassee, but you have their email addresses here as well if that is somebody that you need to reach out to. So again, this training was really this presentation was really just to kind of orient you to a brand new training that Project 10 has to kind of help with compliance with your IEPs and share some of those resources with you. So if you have any questions, we can certainly field some questions now. You can type them in the chat box. 74 of us, we can try to unmute and talk over each other, but it might be easier to do that in the chat box. I'm going to go ahead and flip so that you have my contact information, and let me check the chat to see if we have any questions. Mostly people introducing themselves. Thank you. If you haven't, please introduce yourself in the chat box. That will be great, so that kind of we know who everybody with us today, who you are and what your roles are. Is the training in person or virtual? So good question, Billy. As of right now, our project is still under very restricted travel. So right now it's more than likely going to be virtual. There can be some instances of special consideration where we may be granted the opportunity to travel, but typically right now it's virtual. It does work well virtually because we usually do it via Zoom if your district is allowed to use Zoom, because in Zoom we have the ability to have breakout rooms, and so we can do the activities really easily in Zoom. So the activities that are built into the training, we can send people to virtual breakout rooms to do their activities, and they actually really like it when they get sent, beam you up in cyberspace to another room with other people to interact with. So it does work well virtually. Of course, everything's better face to face, but it can work virtually. I think I saw somebody ask, how long is the training? We'll make it work in the time frame that you give us. Ideally, a good 2.5 hours is really ideal, because that gives us time to get through all the activities, again, have really great conversation, because what typically happens with this training is it sparks so many questions and different scenarios, and so we end up usually having really great, robust conversation, which obviously takes up time, but it's all great. So 2.5 hours is probably ideal. If you say, hey, I can only give you 2 hours, I'm going to make it work in 2 hours. If you tell me that I've got an hour, it's going to be really tight, but we'll do the best we can, or maybe we break it up into multiple sessions. So that's also an option too. So let me check to see for other questions. Again, I see lots of people introducing themselves, which is awesome. Liz, I don't know if you saw any questions I'm missing anywhere.
No, just comments about people saying that it was great. And I just know we did it in Sarasota County as well. And we were able to break it up into a couple sessions, which was fabulous for our staff to be able to do that. So you guys are very flexible.
Yeah, we are. We try. And then, you know, also sometimes what we do is we also kind of collaborate with our local, you know, whatever the local fiddler's office is for that district. And so sometimes we'll kind of, you know, we'll combine, and fiddlers will kind of do their like kind of some of their compliance pieces, or maybe they'll do matrix in a separate session. And sometimes we collaborate together and we do this training together, where the Project 10 rep does the transition section, and then the fiddlers HRD will kind of do their portion of the compliance and quality IEP training. So it's often a collaborative effort between the two projects. But this training specifically is one that is a Project 10 training. You would reach out to your Project 10 RTR to request this training. So if you haven't reached out to your Project 10 rep for anything related to transition IEP compliance, I would recommend that you do that. They're a great resource for you. Many of the regional reps have had hands-on experience with writing IEPs or have been staffing specialists in a prior life. So we do have a lot of good knowledge about writing compliant IEPs and working on those transition components. So again, and even if you decide that maybe, you know, this whole training, maybe you don't have time to do the whole training in one session. Like Liz said, they broke it up into different sessions. Or sometimes what we can do is maybe you know that you have a very specific need. Like our teachers are struggling with how to write measurable post-secondary goals. So, you know, we can kind of just do it. We can kind of chunk it by topic too. And we can really just kind of focus on how to write good measurable post-secondary goals, or we can chunk it and focus on how to write good present levels and annual goals that go with that, or how do I write a good course of study statement. So we can kind of chunk the information as needed as well. But I would recommend this training. It's been wildly popular. Obviously, in the beginning of the school year, when everything's kind of ramping up, and it's usually a busy time for this training. It kind of slows down a little bit now in the spring in terms of requests for this training. But we did see a lot of requests come pre-planning over the summer, and then definitely once the school year started up. Lots of requests for the training. So again, you know, anything that we can do to help you, just know that Project 10 is a resource for you when it comes to transition IEPs. We can assist again with resources to help you write the IEPs. If you're struggling with finding transition assessments, we can help you find good transition assessments. As well as help with just certain sections, or as well as just kind of give that other, you know, kind of cursory overview of your IEP if you're needing assistance with compliance and kind of reading some of the sections to help you with compliance. I know that a lot of our district staff reached out to their Project 10 RTR when they were going through the self-assessment process. And so that was great. That's always great. We're always more than willing to help with that as well. So again, just know that we're here. We're a great resource for you guys for transition IEPs. So please reach out to your Project 10 RTR as needed. And I'm going to put that map back up just in case you needed it, that has the RTRs and their email addresses. So I thank you guys for coming today, for picking this session to attend. It's
Harley,
hard
your
to
survey.
Don't
forget your survey.
Thanks, Liz.
Okay.
It's hard to follow the keynote because he was so amazing. So on the screen is a poll. This is kind of an evaluation for Project 10. I know that in Event Moby, you also have like an evaluation that's about picking stars. But if you could, I'd really appreciate if you could take my Project 10 evaluation, because I need it for my project. It's specific for me. So if you could take the poll, you should see 4 questions. You may have to scroll down, but you'll see all 4 questions. I would greatly appreciate it. Thank you, Liz, for reminding me about that, because I almost did forget. After you complete the evaluation, again, in Event Moby, there's also another evaluation. I believe it's just clicking number of stars for the session. It's not very, it's not super detailed, won't take you very long. But after you complete the evaluation, you are free to go. I'll stay in the room and kind of see if we have additional questions that might come up. But I appreciate you guys attending the session. I really hope that you enjoy the rest of the Visions Conference. So thanks, everybody.
Thanks. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.